Hello everyone, Kurt Olfer here, and welcome back to another episode from Hofstetter Labs. Today we continue on with our discussion about armor. And before we start getting into the plays of the armored sword section, we're going to start looking at some of the other considerations that happen in regards to apparatuses that are attached to us. I'm talking about scabbards, sheaths, and how they work in conjunct with one another. I feel like this is a very important thing to kind of talk about right now, because the reality is that when you start talking about all the techniques and everything else and some of the positions that Fiore shows within the manuscripts, there's a lot to this that is, I believe, left unspoken. And I'm talking again about how certain combat multipliers like your sword, your dagger, and other situations might hang while using other tools of war. I want to make sure people are aware of this, is that essentially there's nothing in the manuscript that tells you anything about this, and I don't necessarily think that it would have been in there. I feel like this is something that Fiore would have had to talk to somebody about, especially if he's training them and looking at their equipment and everything else, especially if you think about the beginning portions of the manuscript about how I see his one advice. So when we think about these types of things, we have to remember that the possibility is there that this type of stuff would have happened. So that's what we talk about here today. We're going to break this into segments here, and today we're going to be talking about some of the basic stuff that's being carried and how that works in conjunct with other things. But before we get into it, please don't forget, like, subscribe, share with a friend out there, and if you're new to the channel, please leave a comment below out there. Let me know what your thoughts are on this. I'm very curious about how people see this practice, what I'm trying to share with the world out there, and I really want to grow this channel, and that's not possible without viewers like you. So please, welcome, and please join us on this adventure of the 14th century arms. With that being the case here, everybody, let's start taking a look at these other considerations that take place with an armor.
So this week, like I said, we're going to be talking about some other things that may be factors within the conflicts of Armatzaring that are not always depicted in manuscripts or talked about, and so on and so forth. There's no real answer as to why I think that they don't talk about this, other than perhaps we just don't have the manuscript or an account of it in some form or fashion. So I'm giving my opinion, my practice opinion about things I see here that are considerations that you see within art, also in Fiore's manuscript, as far as the few times where you see him with belted on with dagger and sword, and also what he's using a lance or just in general. The thing I have right here, this sword is a replica of the Albion Mercenary that I commissioned through Black Fencer. It's got most of the specs for it all. The scabbard is something I kind of fashioned for myself here. Same with the belt and whatnot. I have a 3-point suspension system. It's not perfect here whatsoever, that I modeled off of a Todd's Workshop piece that I have that's for my present Albion Mercenary. This dagger right here is a blunt trainer that I got from Theron Arms, and it is woven into the belt so that it is relatively fixed in a way, easily accessible, all nuts. So I talk about all those pieces right there because, again, I please understand, much too like what was said in the Arms and Armor video about replicas of replicas of replicas, I have no illusions that these right here are not exact pieces from the period of time, and my hope is that in using this, it is to replicate the concept of arms. So let's talk about some things I'm experiencing right now in this space with it, as it's on my body presently. With the sword hanging like such, right here, it is very easy to find this. I can move and sheath the scabbard here, and once it's out, one thing that's interesting is the scabbard, like I've talked about in other videos, becomes a lot more vertical rather than being outward because the weight of the sword is now in my hand. But this does not stop it from moving here against my body. And the big thing about this here is I fit this sword to my body quite a few times, especially trying to punch holes and whatnot for the purpose of sparring and training and whatnot. And still there's things about it that I will never be used to. Well, let's talk a little bit about when it is scabbarded. We look at this, it's out of the way of everything, right? So I have access immediately here to the sword. My dagger's here, close by, so I can work. So this is, again, once again, talk about that workspace, but now in conjunction with wearing armor, where I don't feel this on my body anymore because I have metal and padding and everything else in between me. I'm not wearing chainmail again today here, but if I was wearing that, it would once again be another limiting factor. For this right here, I barely feel this up against the leg. Only right now am I noticing it by tapping it, which is another part that's interesting. So it doesn't feel like I'm actually armed because I don't feel the contact against me like I would if I was wearing armor. So with this right here, it's very easy to move and walk. There's nothing really stopping me. I can turn relatively easy. You'll notice with my left hand, that's out of practice. I will find it so I can keep it steady to my grip. Again, nothing in a manuscript that talks about that. That's a Curtism. But as a practitioner of arms, I believe that that's something that might have happened where you clasped here to be able to make sure that you don't butt it up against somebody. And that right there makes it a little bit easier to move and form and function as I need it for any type of practice here. Let's talk a little bit about once it's drawn and it's out. So once it's drawn and it's out, immediately, if I let go, the scabbard is going to make itself a lot more close to the body as far as this goes. In later periods, you see like sabers and whatnot, like military sabers, there's a lot of times where the sword hangs vertical here, and the frog is manipulative right here so they can upcut and draw. In the Marine Corps, when they do drill manual stuff with swords, it's the same thing where you come over, up, and when it comes this way here, the frog becomes vertical to the body. My understanding here is that that is a development over the course of centuries, basically to make sure that this thing is not out there. So if you are with somebody, you're not smacking your buddies left and right or getting this tangled. It's actually closer to the body so that you can fight in a way that is not limiting yourself as far as grabbing yourself. But let's talk a little bit about here some other things too that now is actually happening. For this suit that I have here, and again, remember everyone's different, and I think this would be definitely customized to a person's preference. This is right by the fan of my leg harness, which becomes a problem if I go back and catch it, which is not happening right now because it can free float and move. And because this has got a wood core and it's a scabbard, I feel like it can bobble around a little bit easier, which allows for certain actions and attributes to be able to take place. That's a very big part about this. So this right here already, as you can tell, it doesn't limit the workspace, but it does pose an obstacle in a way here, which means I have to navigate in specific ways. Even if it was up, it's now a similar concept. I have to navigate to be able to use it. This is not necessarily a bad thing. It is just something that needs to be experienced and worked through, because at the end of the day, it is very possible to find yourself in this kind of a situation where you are now through these two leather pieces. This could possibly be one of the reasons why with Fiore, or other artistic renditions, they may not have fought with sword scabbards on the hips. They may have pulled it and then passed the scabbard away, or we don't know, because this becomes something that is inhibited. But again, I digress. To the point here is, again, if I am on a horse and I am fighting in different combat situations, or it's a list, so it's like here I have lost the lance and I have to then draw a sidearm, or if I'm on horse and this is available to me, these are things right here that, we don't know. So that means that there's got to be a fighting style system that really applies to this with this in mind. So I say all that right there because if we're going to go through all the sword positions, make note of that, and we're going to observe how this is here, so that once again, when it comes down to movement, is it inhibiting, and why is it not, or why is it? So the first, going through the lines of all the ones we just talked about recently, if we go into that serpent though, so being in the low serpent, the scabbard is very much so out of my way. I can thrust with this, and I can turn in a way, and the scabbard is in between my arms here, but it's not like arm barring me or wrapping me up or anything. It's just keeping it nice and tight, and I can keep it very easy into that space. So the scabbard's not a problem there. We then talk about the high serpent. Very evidently right here, and again, if we're talking about making this position right here of coming at somebody, right? This is relatively easy to maintain and work out of, and nothing is stopping here. I can thrust, I can come low, I can turn down. And again, the scabbard is off to my side, and it's no longer a factor. The other part that comes to this too is, again, as this is happening, pay note to my dagger side. It might fall out in the middle of this recording, because as I'm doing stuff here, it's bumbling about and moving, which is why tying it up properly is a key aspect. So again, talking about here, the high serpent. With the high serpent coming up to this to catch something, again, the scabbard and the dagger are not a problem. So again, we're starting to see a theme here that the positions are augmented, not just for defense, but potentially for optimizing a carry position. Moving down the way, again, so we can go to Vera Croce. I know I went a little bit out of order here, but it doesn't necessarily matter. But again, from here, there's a lot of space off of this. There's nothing, so I can strike out, I can turn, I can thrust, and the scabbard, as it bobbles about, but it is not, it's not a problem for me, and an option for me to be able to turn and play all the way as a sword in one hand, an armored sword, without this getting in the way, because the sword's trajectory is here or here, and I'm not coming straight down into the handle. So again, more to the point that we are not seeing some of the limitations of armor. Mesoport de ferro. Now this is an interesting thing right here. And we're going to be talking about this further. This is the point right here when it comes down to armored sword position. So if my arms are extended, like maybe the image is showing, like we've seen before, the scabbard is touching my arm, but I'm not over top and pushing the scabbard into my leg. It's extended out this way. Very easy to do the things. I can do all sorts of actions right here. And again, my scabbard is far enough away from me that I am able to not contend with this. So it doesn't inhibit my fight patterns. It doesn't mess with the dagger side either, which is another part that's very important to kind of consider. Moving into Posta Sagittaria, again, same kind of considerations. So just like Vera Croce, Posta Sagittaria, with the turn, I don't have anything inhibiting here. Same kind of considerations that come out with all the applications from the other armored sword positions. And then finally, we have the Posta Croce Bastarda here. Of all of them, this is the one that I think is the closest one to my scabbard, but at the same time too, it's still not necessarily inhibiting them. Now, interestingly, if you saw right there, as I struck and I came back, I hit my dagger, and this is where it gets tied up into the arms. Okay? So these are important notes to look at when we talk about the structures of the body, and also how the sword and the equipment of the time is a huge factor for this. Now I'm going to look at two more armored guard positions right here. Well, two that Fiore says are good for in armor or not. And that's Posta Breve. And Posta Breve right here, one of the things I really like about Posta Breve is, again, my arm is not in the way of this scabbard. And I can really project and shoot out thrusts that are able to probe or do whatever, and it costs very little because my arms are close. It also does not, I'm not inhibited whether I'm here with my left foot forward or I am here with my right foot forward. I have this space right here where, once again, the scabbard kind of falls away because of how the weight is. Now, mind you, again, this is a replica. It is not necessarily 100%, but in having used my Albion Mercenary, the same kind of phenomenon happens. And how this strap right here is buckled and tightened and whatever shifts the focus on that. Okay? So there's your breve. The last one I want to talk about is the sort of one-hand position here. And, you know, the thing is, oftentimes this hand is a topic of a discussion. So what is happening with this hand? Am I here with it all so I can strike and then grab? Sure. But it could also be that I'm maintaining my scabbard because I don't want to have this thing whip about in all sorts of forms and directions. Many times in art and depictions and whatnot, how the hand is there signifies something that may not be worn presently in that training. In my experience with Nihon Kendo Kata, there's a lot of time when we go back, we will hold onto our, we have our, with the shorter sword, you have your hand or your hip right here. There's nothing that you're wearing, but it's to simulate doing this where you're maintaining it, and it's not behind your back because you're maintaining the core structure of what's happening. So again, more considerations here to go with. But that's what we're talking about here for this. And again, this is just armored sword or positions of armored sword considerations that, and again, what happens with the workspace.
So as you can see with the video, we're talking about the workspace again. And this is a concept that I've talked about all the way back into the dagger section about making the workspace and how you find things around you. And essentially, you know, the applications and how they work with in conjunction with our body and how we are able to make certain things happen or not happen because of those rotational nodes. By no means whatsoever do I think that this is, the only way to do it. This is just what I observe based upon looking at the manuscript and then kind of breaking it down and seeing how this works both in duress and whatnot, but also against like when I actually have to draw and deploy live arms in training situations. There's one I had before about a range where, drawing this and using the sword, the spear to find that, sticking this into something and being able to turn somebody with the use of this sword. These are all factors right here that do get in the way and cause problems for us if they're not looked upon or scrutinized by the wearer. So a scabbard can be, obviously enhances one's fighting capacity, but it also takes away because it means that there's stuff that's on you that might get in the way, might flip around and whatnot. If you remember, there's a video also I had in regards to like how scabbards land and everything else. I think this is in the sword in one hand section. But again, when you talk about drawing the scabbard, what happens with scabbard technology? I, of course, don't have anything about this that's written down in manuscript-wise, but I do believe that based on how scabbards are made and kind of the observations of how they move, I believe it's probably plausible that they wanted to make sure that the tail of the scabbard would kind of collapse to the body. That way you can find it easier, but also it's not swinging around and it's not going to bog you down. So anything that's loose on you can be used against. And that's the whole point of this. So for this first video right here, we're just going to talk about what was the spatial awareness that's with this, but also the observations that are seen within the armored sword posta and guardia, right? And how them being on there and how our arms and everything else both are not inhibiting our draw capacity to escalate conflict further, but also as a way to be able to, so that I don't get caught up on these things and limit myself out. The one I'd really like to put a note out to is the Mezza Portaferro, and that, essentially in this capacity, one of the things that's very important to me about that is how, essentially, why is it long? Why is he choosing Mezza Portaferro versus, Dente di Chingaro? We're going to be talking about that in greater detail in future videos when we start looking at the sword in two hands while wearing armor section. That's going to be what we're coming up here next, because we're talking about all the positions, both why dagger positions and why they may be a certain way here, and then also, some of the other things out there that may or may not be happening that we're not necessarily going to get from just looking at the manuscript, but perhaps we have to experience and remember the lessons of the lines. So that's what we're going to do for this video right here. Again, I hope this is informative. I'm kind of curious what people have to think about this, because it's been my experience when it comes down to armor practice, and it's not everywhere, because there's plenty of people that do this constantly. They'll wear full ensembles of armor for the purpose of understanding these things. Working with those people is a joy, always. And they're very serious-minded, and it's not about winning in this. It's more about really observing just how crazy this can, can go bad if you don't have access and control to your combat multipliers at hand. And by not knowing where they're at and also not knowing what happens when they're worn on you, these are things right there that have consequences. And yeah, so that's kind of some of the things I'm seeing here that any armor practitioner, I think, might appreciate. So, like I said, leave a comment below. Let me know what your thoughts are on there. And as always, everybody, please, until I see you, stay safe out there. Train well. Fight on. I'll see you all soon.